Hello there, I'm Black Bright News, and as usual, I just comment on the news. I'm not a newscaster, I'm not a news reader, I'm just a regular person who gives my opinion every now and then on what I consider newsworthy topics. Today's newsworthy topic is Shabana Mahmood because she keeps hitting the headlines. And she keeps hitting the headlines because of her proclamation or her announcement what she's going to do to reduce asylum seekers from remaining in the country. So, on the surface of it, she has some reasonable arguments, but what she's not telling the public is, can she do that when there are so many children involved? Now, a lot of the reasons why previous governments or even the existing government cannot do what they say they're going to do because they do not know the legal ramifications. They're not lawyers. They're just regular people who have been voted in. And it's not until they realise the legal ramifications that they think, oh my God, I've made all these promises. And what it does for the public, it makes them look as though they're deceiving us, as though they're taking the pee, as though they think we're idiots. But it's not necessarily that. It is because there are a lot of, like I said, legal ramifications. Anyway, rather than babble on, I always like to read my notes, mainly because I have some key points that I want to put forward. And when I ad-lib, I digress, and it eats out of my 10 minutes. So I hope you can understand and forgive me for that. So, Shabana Mahmood, as Home Secretary, can propose to revoke or amend the statutory duty to provide housing and £49, well, it's about £49.13, weekly allowance to asylum seekers. But whether she can lawfully do this without breaching other legal obligations, i.e. under the Refugee Convention, is questionable because she cannot lawfully create a system where children become homeless or destitute. What's that in English, please? What it means is that if she takes away that a housing allowance and, the £49 a week that they're supposed to live on, or the housing element, not putting them somewhere to live, it does mean that she's saying she'll do it only in situations where the asylum seekers or refugees can afford not to receive that amount. But sometimes they do that assessment and it's based on wrong information. Similarly, when they assess disabled people, and some of the severely disabled don't get the benefits because the assessors have misdiagnosed and they haven't taken their claim seriously, or they haven't given enough evidence. But it doesn't mean those disabled people aren't disabled. So it's a similar situation here where they rely on people to assess a situation and they could be wrong. Now, if it's wrong and she's taken the food, she's stopped the money, and children become destitute and homeless, she's in a lot of trouble, put it that way. So anyway, currently under Section 95 of the 1999 Act, the Secretary of State may provide accommodation and essential living needs to asylum seekers who appear destitute. The source of that is legislation.gov.uk. The typical weekly allowance is £49.18 for self-catered accommodation. Proposed change by Mahmood is that she wants to convert this legal obligation into a discretionary power. So she doesn't want to make it mandatory. She wants the officers to use their discretion. They would no longer be required to provide support in all cases, but would have the discretion to deny it in certain circumstances, e.g. if the person is no longer destitute, can work but chooses not to, those who commit criminality or fail to comply with removal directions, and those who breach support conditions, i.e. they're given a set of conditions and they don't abide by them. Then they can withdraw that money, which makes sense. What Shabana Mahmood, I've already said that. But anyway, let me say it again. What Shabana Mahmood is not telling us is if the asylum seekers have children, it is a whole different ballgame. The UK are bound to safeguard children under 18 regardless of their immigration status. And then if the Home Office doesn't look after them and they've made a mistake, it goes on to the local authority. They then fall under their umbrella, and they're already, overworked and underpaid, I would say. Anyway, 22% of the asylum seekers between 2014 and 2023 were children. This includes both accompanied and unaccompanied children. That's 22% of 111,084, which is around 24,440. So roughly 24 to 25,000 of asylum seekers in that period will be children. So in 2024, there were 108,138 people who claimed asylum. And that means they were probably successful. Well, plus dependents. It's a lot of people. 23,907 were dependents, i.e. family members such as children joining or accompany a main asylum applicant. Like I said, I'm not saying what's right or wrong. I'm just saying that, if you're proclaiming something, you have to make sure you can do it. And so, everyone can give her kudos and say, she's doing the right thing. But in reality, can she do it when there are so much children involved? That's my point. So as much as Shabana Mahmood wants to axe housing and weekly allowance for certain asylum seekers, refugees, if it means that person, well, I shouldn't say refugees, asylum seekers, if it means that person cannot meet their essential living needs, food, shelter, clothing, hygiene, or is at immediate risk of being unable to do so, and it is adversely impacting children in the process, she will not be able to pull it off regardless of what she claims. The Children Act provides a hard legal limit on how far discretionary support cuts can go. This comes directly from the Immigration and Asylum Act 1999, the definition used by the Home Office and the courts. If her actions render asylum seekers or refugees homeless or street sleeping, relying on charity or food banks for survival, unable to buy food or wash, living without heating, basic hygiene, or any financial means, it becomes systemic. Leaving people destitute triggers Article 3 violation. This is why Mahmood's plan involves a legal risk. Shabana Mahmood's proposal includes making support discretionary, not guaranteed, conditional on behaviour, withdrawn for some applicants even if they're still waiting for decisions, removed where a person can choose to work but it does not want to. This could lead to asylum seekers losing accommodation, asylum seekers having no weekly allowance, families with children falling into sudden homelessness, people left with no lawful way to buy food or meet their basic needs. If enough people lose support at once, the system as a whole would produce widespread destitution. UK law has strict, non-negotiable duties towards children, regardless of immigration status. So when she's referring to asylum seekers, she is not sharing the information about whether or not there are children involved and what the implications are. If there are children, data has already suggested that over 25,000 asylum seekers are children who are protected under legal acts. The most relevant are Section 17 of the Children's Act, core duty, local authorities must safeguard and promote the welfare of children in need. We've got the Section 20 of the Children Act. If parents cannot provide accommodation for a child, the local authority must provide emergency accommodation or the child into care. The Human Rights Act 3 and 8. I'm not going to have enough time, am I? No degrading treatment, right to family life. The practical consequences of Mahmood's plan could shift legal responsibility from the Home Office to overstretched local councils. So if asylum support is withdrawn from family, councils would automatically inherit the legal duty to support these children. This creates financial pressure, safeguarding pressure, risk of children entering care, risk of judicial reviews against both the Home Office and the councils. So, Whew.